I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Fragopoulos.
And this is Oeuvrebusters, George. Why didn't you say the name of our podcast? I did it.
Because I like the suspense.
Ooh. That's the new name of the podcast.
Silence is like the highest form of art, because it can't be ruined.
Speaking of not silence and boring people, welcome back to the podcast. Oeuvrebusters Deep Dives by Dialectical Dudes. I'm still trying to make it happen.
Trying
to make it happen.
It's not gonna happen.
And our guest this week is Bryan Cogman. Hi, Bryan.
Hello, gentlemen.
Bryan, what's
how
going
are
on?
you?
I'm excellent. How are you guys? It's lovely to be here.
You don't have to lie to us, Bryan. Nobody's excellent nowadays.
I've been looking forward to this all week. This is this and impeachment were right neck and neck for the things I was looking most forward to.
Oh God!
And I got both in one day.
I'm really glad we, by the way, not to get too inside baseball.
I guess I just dated this episode. Sorry.
It's fine. It doesn't matter. I was going to say I'm glad we didn't do it last Wednesday. That would have been a rougher time.
Oh my God, that's right, because we were originally supposed to
record.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
We'd be like, "Hi, welcome to the podcast."
I was a shell. I don't think I probably if you hadn't postponed, I probably would have been that guy to be like, guys, I just can't do it. I just don't think I could be present.
I promise I did not do that. I did not have knowledge. That's not why I canceled the
No, because I think you did before the Capitol was attacked.
Yes. Yeah.
I feel like it was an hour prior.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
At like 1 p.m. that day, I was like, guys, I'm not going to be able to make it to the recording session. I need bail money. Actually, no, I just walked out because that's what happened.
Why is he calling me from within the Capitol?
You may have seen call was the guy dressed as Chewbacca.
Your one call was to Bryan Cogman and George Fragopoulos? That's really...
They really don't want to piss me off in terms of podcast.
We really care about
although now that Bryan has mentioned that we're doing this on the day of the second impeachment, this automatically goes into the Library of Congress, this episode.
Oh, hey, well.
It is automatically of great historical importance.
We'd better do a good job then.
Hey, Library of Congress, how do you like your dick jokes? Because they're coming at you, probably.
Oh, are they? Oh, well, great.
We should introduce our guest.
So it's that kind of podcast. I see.
It definitely is. When it works.
Bryan, George, should I introduce our guest in a more formal, now that we've been idiots with him for 4 minutes?
Good.
Bryan Cogman is a screenwriter, producer, and once and future actor. He spent 10 years and 8 seasons working on the HBO series Game of Thrones, finishing up its run as co-executive producer and writing 11 episodes of the series. He is a consulting producer on Amazon's upcoming Lord of the Rings series and has written the screenplay for Disney's upcoming live-action remake of Sword in the Stone. Currently, Bryan is developing a number of new original TV series for E1, including a contemporary reimagining of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo.
So not entirely an original series.
So Bryan, a million questions. First of all, what's Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
Is that a show?
It was a little show about a bastard and a dream. It's still a blur. I'm still, suffering mild PTSD from Game
Where
of Thrones,
can I find it? I'm going to keep this joke going. No,
you can find it on HBO Max now.
Do you when you were working on the show and working at it on the end, and I still have not seen the last season, I've held off.
Really?
I don't know how. Yeah, I've been holding it.
We're in quarantine too.
I know. Were people like calling you and being like, "What the what were they giving you a hard time?" Did you get hot takes from people?
Well, sure. Some.
Yeah.
I mean, I was not on social media for those couple of years, which was probably wise.
Healthy.
And then by the time I got back on, everyone had essentially calmed down, and I still get the occasional unsolicited review.
Hate mail.
But most of which are people are very nice generally who reach out. Occasionally you get a nasty comment, but for the most part, the fandom has been lovely to me, and
that's great.
And was through the most of the series. But hey, it inflamed a lot of passions, which I'd rather work on something that people cared that much about than something that was ignored. So
Totally.
So there it is. But yeah, it was. I say PTSD not so much because of the reaction, good or ill, but simply just the making the show. I don't think I quite realized how tired I was until the decade was over.
I can only imagine.
You know what I mean? Especially that last season.
Yeah.
The last season was a real. I mean, it was a solid year of production. And,
also, it was like feature films.
Those were like in terms of the scope, things. For sure. Yeah,
Jeez,
definitely,
man.
Definitely, and night shoots and all of it. So it's been nice the last couple of years writing and kind of being at home. But I'm itching to get back on set again. I do miss that. I do miss it. So hopefully if COVID allows it, production will resume again on one of these things.
Fingers crossed that'll happen soon. You may have guessed already, but in case you haven't, George, what movie has Bryan agreed to come talk to us about today?
Liam, we are talking about 1961's Yojimbo, which, if you don't mind, I'd like to read a plot summary of Yojimbo.
I'd love to hear what
That's
Yojimbo
good because I've not seen the picture. I've not seen the movie, so I'm excited to hear what it's about. I just heard, IP, great. No, I'm kidding. Of course,
it's not
I'm joking.
about a guy named Jim, for sure.
Yeah. Yo, Jim. Yeah, no, it is not that. I'm joking, of course. Listeners, don't worry.
So Yojimbo tells the tale of a ronin, that is a samurai without a master, who stumbles across a town that is besieged by two rival gangs. Two gang leaders, Sebe and Ushitora, have aligned themselves with two different merchants. One is sake seller, the other is silk seller. The sake seller, by the way, is played by Liam. Do you know who the sake seller is played by?
Is it It's Takashi Shimura.
Takashi Shimura.
Yeah. How dare you try to step the greatest
legend,
Kurosawa actor? Yeah.
The Ronin, who goes by the name of Sanjuro, which translates to mulberry field, in which he kind of just completely pulls out of his ass, decides to stay in town in order to kill a whole bunch of dudes and to get the two gangs to destroy one another. In the process, Sanjuro rescues a number of people from the evil clutches of the two gangs, such as the wife of a local man who's been abducted and basically sold off into sex slavery to Ishitora. At some point, Sanjuro is captured and beaten up, but escapes. Film ends with him confronting Ishitora's gang after it has destroyed Sebe's gang and pretty much slain everybody in Sebe's family as well, including his wife. Sanjuro then slays everybody that's left and leaves the town after bringing peace to the land. The end.
There you have
wow,
it.
that is basically what happens in Yojimbo.
I did see the movie
Yojimbo
twice, even actually.
The film was directed by Akira Kurosawa. It was written by Akira Kurosawa and Ryozu Kikushima. It was produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka and Ryozu Kikushima and Akira Kurosawa, and was edited, almost as always, by Akira Kurosawa. God, what a talented jerk.
Yeah, that's astonishing.
Toshiro Mifune plays Kuwatabataki Sanjuro, which means mulberry field. Tatsuya Nakadai, who amazingly Kurosawa didn't actually like for this role, plays Unosuke, the gunslinger.
When you say didn't like, you mean didn't want to cast him or wasn't pleased with the performance?
I think he didn't want him for the performance.
Didn't want him for the role. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then he watched a bunch of movies that he was in. Takashi Shimura as Tokuyamon, Daisuke Kato, who's in a bunch of Kurosawa films, as Inokichi, Shizaburo Kawasawa as Saibe, Kyuzu Sazanka as Ushitori, and in her final Kurosawa role, Izuzu Yamada as Orin, who she's probably best known for Throne of Blood as the Lady Macbeth.
Yes, indeed.
Stand-in.
It's always fun to see his stable of repertory players in these movies. It must be fun watching them all together the way you gentlemen are, and seeing how he utilizes them.
Is there is an actor, one of the things that's been great, and I'm sure George can speak to this too, is that we set out to do this to talk about Mifune and Kurosawa, but it has almost as much been a Takashi Shimura podcast.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
there's a couple other small. So Honama, the master swordsman who leaves because he's only making 2 ryu,
Right.
is Susumu Fujita, who is the lead of Sanshiro Sugata, the early
Mhm.
Kurosawa films, and was sort of his like muse before Mifune shows up. And I think it's interesting how
Well,
in
that's kind of a
the
meta commentary there, isn't it?
yeah, and the same thing
Wow.
happens
Yeah.
in Hidden Fortress, where Mifune fights off Susumu Fujita, and they're sort of like 2 Adonises fighting, and there always seems to be this conflict between them in the movies. And
Well, and then
note
you
what
have Tetsuya Nakadai making
yes,
his debut. I think his Kurosawa debut. It's certainly
hmm
in a major role in this movie, and then in Sanjuro, also playing the antagonist, and that seems weirdly unintentional, a kind of foreshadowing of the passing
I
of the
don't think I
baton.
knew he was in Sanjuro. That's really interesting. I think
Yeah,
I'd
he's the
forgotten.
villain. He's his primary villain antagonist in Sanjuro as well, and a lot of the same cast turns up, even though it's technically a sequel.
I love it. I love that he just did
Yeah.
that. And then the other person I just wanted to mention is the really amazing where is he on this list here? Kamatari Fujiwara, who is actually in more Kurosawa films than any other actor.
And who does he play?
He plays Tazamon, the man who murders the silk merchant who goes insane and murders.
Yeah. Oh, he's
Yeah,
fantastic. He's
he's in
fantastic.
this. He's
He's a
in
great part in Sanjuro as well.
yeah,
As you'll
Lower
see. Yeah.
Depths,
Mm-hmm.
High and Low, Bad Sleep Well, Hidden Fortress, I Live in
Yeah.
Fear, Seven Samurai, Ikiru. He's in more. I think he's weirdly in more movies than a lot of these guys. So it's been really interesting.
The Ward Bond of
Yeah,
Kurosawa. Huh?
yeah,
Anyone?
exactly. Yeah, I like
Anyone?
it. Yeah, we're with you. We're with you.
Well, because I remember when the AFI list came out, they said the actor with the most films in the AFI list is Ward Bond, because he was just in everything.
Oh my,
Anyway.
yeah, that is fun. I didn't. I thought we were making an actual Bond reference. I got confused on where I was
Ward
with
Bond.
that. Ward Bond.
Ward Bond. He
It.
was in all of John Ford's movies, and he's Bert the Cop in It's a Wonderful Life. He's in every old movie you've ever seen. But playing like the utility character parts,
George, season 6, Ward Bond.
Possibly.
It would take you 10 years to do it.
I know.
There's too many movies.
We'd have to pick and choose very, very carefully.
Yeah, because he's one of those dudes
though.
that made like 100 movies. Because he was just one of those contract players that just
Well, it's like also when you look at the filmographies of some of these actors in these Kurosawa films, they made a movie every 15 minutes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's unbelievable. Like we're reading the Stuart Galbraith book, The Emperor and the Wolf, which
cool.
It's amazing.
I've never read it. No, I know of it, but I've never read it.
He was cool and came on the first episode of the podcast and sort of like schooled us
on.
Yeah,
that's
we got him to kind of like, he lives in Kyoto and like was sort of just like, yeah, I'll come talk about my 25-year-old book. Sure, guys, whatever you want me to do. But he made the good point that about sort of like the system. It's a great
thick book.
It is.
I should pick that up now that I'm because I've always been a big Kurosawa fan, and I've seen most of his major pictures, but I would never profess to be any kind of encyclopedic expert on him. So I'm gonna have to listen back episodes of the season as well. Because as I've been diving into Yojimbo obviously quite a lot, but I want to be more familiar with all of it.
It's been really, really great for us. We're coming sort of to the end because we're covering mostly the Mifune Kurosawa stuff, but it's been really, really amazing. Speaking of Galbraith, I did not know this, but the film is actually based on Dashiell Hammett's continental op novel, Red Harvest, which I read in a single sitting on Christmas Eve 3 years ago. And I just picked it up and was like, here we go.
Did it resonate?
Red Harvest... Did Red Harvest resonate?
For Liam, sorry, like watching this again, were you able to pick up on? Because I had
a little bit. Brian, you probably know it pretty well.
Red Harvest is one of my favorite books. I love the Continental Op. Here's my big book of the Continental Op right here.
Oh man!
So all the shorts. So the Continental Op. The Continental Op is Dashiell Hammett's first great character. He appeared in dozens of short stories. So this book has the short stories, and then 2 novels, Red Harvest and another novel called The Dane Curse, which is also awesome. And Red Harvest was actually originally a bunch of short stories published in Black Mask magazine called The Cleansing of Poisonville. That was the original title,
Oh, so
which
good.
I fucking love. And actually, if you read the original short stories, he did quite a bit of revisions when they were put together to be the novel Red Harvest. But anyway,
Right.
the Continental Op is an operative of a Pinkerton-esque agency who, much like Yojimbo, comes into this town that's under the yoke of two rival criminal organizations, and much like Yojimbo and Fistful of Dollars, he insinuates himself into kind of both worlds and plays them against each other, and they destroy each other. And so, yes, it is an unofficial inspiration to this film. And then filmmaking wise, Kurosawa acknowledged a 1942 picture called The Glass Key, which is also based on a Dashiell Hammett novel. But yeah, it's definitely rooted in hard-boiled detective fiction of the 20s, which is my favorite thing. It's actually weirdly one of the things that got me most excited about doing a new version of this film, is to be able to tap into those literary sources in terms of the inspiration of how to do it in a contemporary setting, because thematically there's so much, they have so much in common. I mean, I'm jumping around a lot, but yeah, Red Harvest is amazing. There's never been a Continental Op movie or a Red Harvest movie because, and believe me, I've looked into it, because I think the rights are still in the hands of someone who's had them forever. And the closest thing we ever got, besides these movies, to a Continental Op movie, funnily enough, is Bryan Johnson's Brick. You guys remember that movie?
I love that movie.
I've never seen it.
Brendan in Brick is essentially the Continental Op.
I could totally see that. Well,
and in terms of persona and that kind of ratty and hunched and takes a beating, kind of less suave and smooth than, say, Philip Marlowe, or
I'm going to take a big swing and guess that Rian Johnson is also a pretty big Continental Op fan.
Oh yeah,
1920s film noir. Yeah.
No, he's said as much. I mean, he's said that Brick is essentially his Dashiell Hammett Continental Op.
Yeah, I love that movie. George, you should see it. I think
you'd dig it. It's great.
Speaking of all these things, Yojimbo is a subversion of a chambara genre, which were action films about feudal Japan that I feel like are somewhat comparable to like 90s and 80s action movies in the United States, just in terms of their frequency and kind of appeal. The film was revolutionary for its sound effects, music. The music is unreal, graphic violence, and its anti-hero. I want to chat about. I'm excited to talk about the anti-hero in this. The film was a huge hit both in Japan and the United States. Kurosawa and his cinematographer Kazuo Miyagawa reunited for this film. They hadn't worked together since Rashomon. Famously, Kurosawa sued Sergio Leone after the release of A Fistful of Dollars. Kurosawa won the lawsuit and was rewarded something along the lines of $100,000.
Wow!
Finally, in the early
$1 million.
$1 million.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it always amused me that Leone thought they thought they could get away with it.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
It's so blatantly.
So, in the Galbraith book, there's this great story about how Leone received a letter from Kurosawa that basically said, like, "Hey, great film, but you totally ripped me off."
Yeah,
and Leone was so thrilled that Kurosawa said that he had made a great film that he apparently kept showing everybody this letter. And they were like, "Dude, you can't fucking brag about that letter because we're getting sued."
He's suing you.
Yeah, Leone's like, "But he said I made a great film. Like Kurosawa said I nailed it." And they're like, "Dude,
that's pretty amazing.
Not a good show. Not a good show."
That's funny.
According to George, this is terrible remake was made in the early 1990s with Bruce Willis. Takes place during the 1930s, titled Last Man, directed by the great Walter Hill.
Great
so I'm
director.
going to take a little bit of exception. I enjoyed that film. I haven't seen it since I was...
even Picasso occasionally made a shitty painting. I'm just saying.
I've not seen the film. I intend on at least screening it once, before I get into adapting this new version in earnest, just for due diligence. But I haven't seen it. I'll probably like it. Isn't it set in like the 30s in Prohibition?
Yeah.
I'm gonna love it.
Is Walken in it? Is Christopher Walken
isn't
in
it? Yeah.
Oh well. Okay.
In all fairness, it's been a very long time since I've seen it, so I should go back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Just in
suspect
the-
I'll be fine with it, but I haven't.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it.
Speaking of reactions, Brian, how do you like Yojimbo? What are your feelings about this movie?
Funnily enough, I don't like the movie. No, no. I listen. This is a masterpiece. I mean, what do you
Right.
what do you say? I mean, it's I would have first seen it. I used to live in New York, and I would go to Film Forum there all the time,
Mhm.
as young earnest acting students were wont to do. And I remember they were doing a Kurosawa Mifune series where they screened all of them. So I saw within the space of a few days, all for the first time in
Oh.
beautiful prints, Seven Samurai, Stray Dog, Hidden Fortress, Yojimbo, and Throne of Blood. I think those were
Damn.
the ones I saw in that series, and of course immediately fell in love. I've probably, I mean, if I'm being honest, of all of the Kurosawa Mifune collaborations, I've probably watched Throne of Blood and Seven Samurai the most.
Mhm.
Particularly Throne of Blood. I'm an enormous fan of that. I mean, I was a classical acting major, and so for obvious reasons, I was attracted to
Yeah.
Kurosawa's Shakespeare films. Um, but I love Yojimbo, and then I've revisited it many years since, and always loved it. And it's an incredible movie. It's so what I've discovered, having rewatched it now several times since getting this particular gig. I'm struck by how, and I guess this is true of any great filmmaker or any Kurosawa film, but it's so lean and
Mhm.
tight. There's not a wasted moment. There's not a wasted shot. And it's also so funny. I had forgotten, and I think it's because in my head for many years, I had sort of, in some ways, meshed it with A Fistful of Dollars. I'd forgotten how funny and kind of blatantly allegorical it is. I mean, it's a dark comic allegory of the rise of capitalism and the death of chivalry, essentially. And that wouldn't have really occurred to me before. I in many ways, because I probably had seen Fistful of Dollars. In fact, I'm sure I'd seen A Fistful of Dollars before I'd ever seen Yojimbo, as
Mhm.
I'm sure many uh, Western viewers
Me
have.
too.
So I think in the first few times I ever watched Yojimbo, um, I was thinking of it in this is a Western terms, because I knew about the Western remake, and certainly it is. I mean, Kurosawa called it a gangster Western, that's a concept I'm embracing for my version. Just but
Yes.
a gangster Western. I mean, what could be better? But and so it certainly has Western trappings, and obviously pays a lot of visual uh, 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 tribute to Westerns and John Ford and all
Mhm.
of it. But it's that scrappy, hard-boiled, lean, Dashiell Hammett actually sort
Mhm.
of aesthetic that I really respond to when watching it. And then the other thing that has really, I've got it playing in front of me right now, actually, and I'm just looking at it. Just the composition of it. It uses widescreen in such an
Yeah.
incredible way, because it's a widescreen movie and there isn't anything wasted in the frame, but it's a lot of close-ups. It's a lot of
Mhm.
beautifully composed widescreen close up. I imagine in pan and scan it would be a fucking nightmare. I mean, I guess that's true about any movie that's in pan and scan, but particularly this, because just the way that I'm looking at a shot right now where Mifune's head is tight in the frame on the left side of the frame, and then a bunch of bodies on one side, and that's used to great effect in Sanjuro. Maybe even more
Mhm.
so in this movie. Sorry, I'm jumping around because I just love
No,
it
it's
so
Fine.
much.
Please.
I've
Please.
been watching this goddamn movie so much lately that I'm having dreams
Are you
about it, and
watching it like
it's
weekly? Like what's your frequency?
I don't know if I haven't hit weekly yet, and at a certain point I'm going to have to put it away and just really focus
Yeah.
on our version, which is, I mean, and all I can say about it is that it's obviously a TV series. It's a reimagining, and it's contemporary, and that's all I can say about it. But uh, so so it's going to take it's going to be its own thing. It's going to
Yeah.
be inspired by, but it's going to be its own thing. So eventually I'll have to put it to one side. Yeah, I've probably watched it on average once a week for the last few weeks.
Wow.
Time well spent. I mean, it's never boring, and you're always finding something new. And in many ways, it's not helpful because it's too good a movie. So the homework I need to do to sort of help me structurally with mine, or like, oh, okay, what character is this, and how could this character be reimagined, or my analytical movie brain gets pushed to the side, and the movie fan just gets enveloped by it on the 12th viewing, which, I mean, if that isn't a vote of if that isn't praise, I don't know what is. So it's a great movie. It's a great movie.
100%. And there's so much to talk about there, but
sorry, I was like,
no, in the best way. Like,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of stuff that I want to come back to, especially composition. But George, you don't like this movie, right? Because you're a Neanderthal.
Ooh, yeah, this film sucks. No, this film is fucking amazing. This film. So this was one of the films too I was really excited to go back and revisit because it's been a very long time since I've seen this. So this, Seven Samurai, Throne of Blood, and I still think Throne of Blood, it might be my favorite so far. I mean, I know we still have 3 more to go.
I think it's still my favorite too.
Yeah, and what it does also, because it just, I mean, yeah, that film was amazing. But also, one of the things that's interesting to me about also that film, not to talk too much about Throne of Blood, but again, it's horror elements, which are so wonderfully executed. But this film it's so good, and it's so. This might be weird, like one singular scene to focus in on, even though it's an amazing scene. But like, for example, like the scene in which he devastates the interior of that building after he's like slaughtered those guys. And just thinking about
with knocking
and just thinking about just kind of the physicality of that scene, what it represents, how it's executed, how the camera follows him around. It's singular kind of. It's violent. It's just everything. And just thinking about how real it all feels. And I remember watching it yesterday, and I briefly watched it again today, but like I just had it in the background. And again, it was that scene that while I was watching it, I was enjoying it the entire time, but that was like the moment that kind of like took me over the hill to be like, okay, this film is like spectacular. And I remembered loving it too. It's awesome. It's ridiculous. And of course, like Mifune's portrayal of this character, again,
I mean, it made him an international icon, and
rightfully so.
And he's great, obviously, in all the films that came before this. But it's funny, on the commentary track on the Criterion disc, they talk about how even Kurosawa, after making this movie, realized that they had come to a place now where Mifune is now an icon, and in all the movies that they didn't make that many after this.
I think 3.
Yeah, it's like Sanjuro and High and Low, and then Redbeard, right?
Yep.
That he now felt obliged to present him as Toshiro Mifune, the icon. There was he couldn't be that guy from Seven Samurai again. After this, it was such a sea change.
Yeah. And so, this film is, and I've not seen the sequels, which I'm really excited about seeing.
Oh, I can't wait to hear what you guys think of Sanjuro, because it's great. It's also a masterpiece, a completely different,
it's a
kind of movie, and he's still very much the guy, but in another kind of picture altogether. And I certainly prefer this one, but it's a lot of fun. It's very different though, and much more overtly comic too.
I think it gets a bum rap because it's not this movie, or that's not that it gets a bum rap, but it's not. People don't talk about it in the same way, but it's really interesting.
Is that the one where he gets frozen in carbonite at the end?
Yes, exactly.
It's a bit of a bummer. It's a bit of a bummer as
he finds out he's a nobody. He's not actually the
right.
So funny story, Bryan, your story about going to Film Forum and seeing repertory stuff inspired a lot of feelings in me, because that's what I did for my 12 years in New York. And I remember I didn't do it with Kurosawa because there wasn't one, but I remember going to Film Forum every day for 16 days and saw every Robert Bresson film.
Oh, wow.
Like literally every day I was there, and it was just like I was in grad school and I just had the time, and I would just sit there, pay $8 for a ticket, and it's making me very like, God, I miss movie theaters.
Oh, I miss theaters, and I miss Film Forum. I mean, because they would do those mega series over the course of, several weeks. I remember when they did their Pre-Code series. They had every Pre-Code
it was the best. It was so
movie.
good.
Oh,
I saw the original Maltese Falcon at a Pre-Code
Oh,
screening.
the BB Daniels. Oh, it's great. It's great.
And speaking of Yojimbo, the last movie I saw in LA before COVID was my first movie at the New Beverly, and it was High Plains Drifter, which is a very, very fucked up riff on Yojimbo. Like very, very. So this movie, funnily enough, last year when we moved here, I was like sitting on the couch, I had everything to do, and I said, I'm gonna watch Yojimbo. I haven't seen it in a while. I got about 15 minutes in, and I went, have I ever seen Yojimbo? And what I realized is I had seen it in pieces and chunks for my whole life, but I'd never sat down and watched it beginning to end.
That happens a lot. You realize you've seen clips in so many things that you think you've seen a classic movie, and then
And it ended, and my jaw was on the I was just like, I thought I'd seen this whole movie. I've never seen it beginning to end. And I think the biggest takeaway for me was how samurai-esque it was, about how it's barely a samurai picture. And I think that's really amazing. And revisiting it today, I had a similar experience. I mean, this movie rocks. And I think that I really want to get into it, but I think the thing that I took away this time was I was like, okay, the story's great, performances are great, but the vibes of this movie, like just sitting there and watching him kind of like hang out and eat,
just drink
and just like drink and
lounging in the corner,
and
trying to
they'll look out the
sleep.
window and someone will like peer in and give them like a look, and you're just like, this movie has like serious vibes. Like it's really kind of a great hangout movie. And one thing that I think we should chat about, we're coming back to Mifune, the anti-hero quality, but like on some level, is this character and this performance, and this is quite a hot take, is this the most important / influential performance of the 20th century? Is his performance in this movie, like, it feels like you can see and maybe this movie too, but you can see every leading male in an action movie after this movie.
You could make that argument. I mean, because it's certainly, I don't think there's a Hollywood leading man that predates him he certainly bridges a gap between someone like, say, I don't know, John Wayne or Bogart. Even Bogart might be the closest, and indeed Bogart rose to superstardom as a Dashiell Hammett character, as Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a good argument to be made for sure, because look, this inspires Eastwood and Eastwood's entire perspective. And while Eastwood's Man with No Name is in many ways quite different from Mifune's Sanjuro, it's I mean, you can certainly trace this to, I don't know, John McClane and Die Hard, or
Denzel.
a lot of other,
sure. Watching all these Tony Scott movies recently, but like
Harrison Ford.
Harrison Ford.
Yeah, I think a lot about Harrison Ford when I watched Mifune in a lot of these movies, but in this one as well. And I don't know that Ford ever had a role quite like this one, unless I'm blanking on something obvious. But what I love about him is, that tick that he has where he's scratching the back of his neck, and he's kind of doing this with his shoulder. I mean, I'm doing this, a podcast and no one can see, but I'm sort of hunching over and scratching. And it's because they made this decision that he's probably got fleas, because he's so fucking ratty and dirty. And so he's probably got fleas. Then that's just going to be crass. Like, I can't think of a modern equivalent to even that. It's so singular, but yeah, I don't know, the hard-boiled persona that he kind of imbues this movie with, it certainly has its roots in kind of pulp crime fiction, and then it's weird because these things all comment on each other. You've got pulp 20th century pulp crime fiction and classic westerns influencing this, which then turn around and essentially birth the spaghetti western as we know it. It's funny how they kind of, and this happened as well with Magnificent Seven and Seven Samurai. Like these filmmakers from across the world were sort of riffing on each other and in turn reinventing each other's genres. I don't really know what the fuck I'm talking about, but
well, they're all really in communication. I think that but I do think that
they're in communication.
they're in
That's a better way
communication.
to. There's a better way to put it. I've had a few bears. It's fine.
It's fine. Have as many. Please
Haven't we
keep
all?
going.
It's quarantine.
Yeah.
I think the thing that what I'm thinking about with Ford is there's this kind of like honorable. Ford always, even as Han Solo, like has this sort of like core goodness. I mean, indeed, that's like sort of the arc of Han Solo in those movies. Is he sort of begins as a bit of a Mifune, and then at the end is like,
right,
this good dude.
And in the end, he comes back to that boy from Corellia who fell in love with Emilia Clarke.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's just like he doesn't. Oh my God, I forgot about that movie. Jesus. But he kind of like he just exudes this sort of nihilism, and this is something that George brought up in the notes. Is this movie is so goddamn cynical? George, you want to talk about the cynicism?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, there's so many
ways
with
the
cynicism,
it
kind of manifests itself. But I mean, so one of the things that Bryan already kind of mentioned, I think Bryan already mentioned this too, right? About how one of the things that this film is about the ways in which kind of the emergence of capitalism at this time in Japan is this kind of really terribly corrosive influence in society. So that all of these like touches of modernity that you see, whether it's, for example, like the guy with the gun or these battles over influence in terms of like who controls these markets, is kind of what dooms everybody. But that there's no real escape, right? So that like even like Mifune's character, who is clearly to some degree like the good guy because he's bringing, let's say, peace to the land, but that peace comes about in this kind of these absolute bloodbaths. He has to like slaughter all these dudes to bring about like this peace in the land. So there's I guess a kind of justice, but it's a justice in the most kind of like brutal fashion.
Yeah, because it's not like you. It's great because at the end, I think, and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says, "Well, it's going to be quiet around here now." And I said, "Well, sure." There's nobody left, man. I mean, you
killed all the people.
Like you feel, the viewer feels okay about it because, and this is a very deliberate thing on Kurosawa's part, the warring families are the most just loathsome, garish, almost, not even almost, in some cases, overtly cartoony scumbags. There's no there's great subtlety in many of the characterizations in many Kurosawa films. This is not one of them, and that's not a criticism. This is the point he's trying to make. This is an allegory, and it's funny because he is like Han Solo in as much as because there is the subplot with the family, and like ultimately. And I think this is why the movie is palatable. It's the reason Fistful of Dollars is as well. And Fistful of Dollars takes this subplot a bit farther and makes it more front and center of the movie than this film. But he comes to town to make some money and to amuse himself and to watch these people squirm. But he is derailed and indeed nearly defeated because of his extra show of real samurai chivalry at that key moment, where he frees the woman and sends the family off. That act is what exposes him essentially, and nearly undoes him, which I've always found kind of interesting. It doesn't come up much in a lot of the studies of the movie. The studies of a lot of, I've got Donald Ritchie's book here, which is really great about Kurosawa, and he really focuses on the black comedy and the allegory and the fact that there's no redeeming qualities in any of these people. But that's a very, to me, purposeful,
for sure,
wrinkle, which I've always found kind of interesting. But it's it's about, as you say, it's about commerce. A big factor of this film, which is not done at all in Fistful of Dollars. These characters are eliminated, but it's an essential part of this movie is the idea that these criminal organizations are in bed with legitimate businesses. It's, as you said in your description, it's the sake merchant and the silk merchant. That's a huge part of this movie, and the movie ends, of course, with these two silk merchants as you say, one of them going insane and killing the other, which seems like a sort of wish fulfillment that Kurosawa is positing, because that these industries will eventually eat each other alive, which, as we know, they did not and do not.
Prince calls it apocalyptic in his commentary, which I was listening to today, and he says it's this kind of like it crescendos into this kind of apocalypse whereby, the entire town, let's say, is leveled. And again, if you extrapolate it in this kind of allegorical sense, that it's this kind of, as you said, Brian, possibly this desire on Kurosawa's part to kind of like to bring about like a certain kind of like leveling of the capitalist system entirely. But also, like, for example, going back to like the cynicism, not necessarily the cynicism, but also thinking about, again, the randomness of it all too, about how the film begins with him just tossing the stick in the air, which is so great. So he's at this crossroads, he just tosses the stick, and it's like, all right, fuck it, it's just go there.
That's where I'm going.
I got nothing. I got fleas, a sword, and a whole bunch of time. I got nothing else to do. I'm just gonna go down this road, and that's how the entire story unfolds. Even that, right? There's kind of the randomness of it all, the contingency which sets it all into motion is amazing.
One of the small things that I feel like, in addition to Mifune's sort of arc as a character in terms of revealing that he actually, cares about this family, he cares about these things, he has a heart, he's not just in it for, chaos and money, is that family that we see at the beginning, the son who has the argument with the father, is the son who he spares later in the movie and says, like, go home to your, and like whatever he says to him exactly. And it's
terrific too, because you've forgotten about that guy.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a weird kind of redemption for the character in terms, not in Mifune in some ways, but also for this young boy who's like sort of fallen in with the tough crowd. And I think, it's interesting that that's the choice that Kurosawa makes. One thing that we've talked about a lot, but is harder to parse in terms of cultural questions of cultural, and culture and politics, is that Kurosawa's sort of politics are a little all over the map. Like, he's clearly someone who believes in like a collective good, but also is deeply concerned with the individual within the larger collective. And like, I think Seven Samurai is obviously like the great movie he made about, collectivism and working together and helping the poor. But this movie is just like a giant fuck you to like kind of amazingly the most like overtly political movie I feel like he's ever made.
Yeah, and a big kind of, maybe not a fuck you, but a real subversion of his own work and his own star's previous work in some ways. I mean, austere is probably the wrong word to use to describe something like Seven Samurai, but it almost feels austere when you're watching this one, because it's so down and dirty, and as such. If you're talking about one that you might want to give somebody who might be afraid of an old movie or a Japanese movie or both,
right?
Along with Seven Samurai, this is the one. I mean, this thing plays just like gangbusters. It really does. It's just again, it's so tight. Just it's a pure execution of story and telling us. I've got it on right now, as I said, and just. You can watch it with no sound on, and just the visuals are so arresting and dynamic, But yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that it was his biggest. Did you say it was his biggest? I know it was his biggest hit in the West. Was it his biggest hit at home as well?
It was a huge hit in Japan.
Huge hit. I think it was, but I think it was his biggest Western hit, I would
also assume it's one of the first films that he made that got, and I'm a little bit guessing here, but that got a untouched, probably pretty close to original release, because for years so many of these films came as oddities to the US, and they were written about like in pretty racist ways by major film critics, but like
I think like 5 years later too.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Right.
Or the writing would be like, the exoticism of Japan makes the film like harder, and you're just like, oh god.
Yeah.
But
thanks, Bosley Crowther.
Exactly. Or like, yeah, exactly, literally, exactly.
Right.
But this film feels so unmistakably modern.
Yeah.
Or contemporary that it doesn't feel like it's aged a day. A couple things that that really stick out to me. The playing of both sides is obvious. The sort of like cynic with a heart of gold, but also the sort of hierarchical buildup to the villains, I think, is really cool. And is this the first time we have like a 7-foot tall like Bond Jaws henchman in a movie?
Man, he's great. It may be.
Yeah,
he's incredible.
There's an amazing array of like grotesque figures.
The faces, well, even just the faces they're pulling, like and I'm terrible. I'm so horrible with the names, so forgive me. But it's the actor who appears in a ton of Kurosawa's films, who plays the other brother.
Yeah.
Not Tetsuya Nakadai, but the other brother.
Daisuke Kato.
Yes, who's wonderful and
with the teeth.
With the teeth and just this ridiculous face he's pulling the whole movie.
His face, he looks like a rabbit.
Which is it's completely ridiculous, but perfect. Just absolutely
right, it really
perfect,
is.
You know? And then that final showdown where they're cutting from that, all-time top 5 movie image shot of Mifune alone coming in with the wind billowing, cutting to the goons, the 10 guys marching toward him, and just the composition of that shot and all those crazy faces and body types.
Good, yeah.
And Nick Kadai with the gun. The way he points the gun is even weird.
I just love how he always has it like tucked away.
Well, it's funny. In this last rewatch, I realized he doesn't know how to point a gun because he's never seen a movie with someone pointing a gun. So he's
he hasn't watched the Bogart film. That's the problem.
He clearly hasn't seen the Bogart film. So it's like, how do I hold this? And so he's holding it in this absurd way, but he doesn't know what to do with a gun. It's
I don't know whose decision that is, but it's such an amazing like so many of these characters have again like these little tics that make them so realized and so fully actualized. It's amazing. So like the way he holds the gun, again Mifune's tics, like whatever, like so many of them have like these little kind of touches that
the
really
way Mifune eats the chicken, the way he eats the chicken or whatever it is that's boiling when he comes in, like the dumplings. It looks like maybe it's because I haven't eaten a carb, but I was like, oh, that's chicken. But like the way he's blowing on it and just enjoying it and like and the rice, like it's just
it's such an incredible physical performance that you're absolutely right. Even just watching him do business like eating some rice out of a bowl with some fucking chopsticks is somewhat riveting.
Absolutely.
It's such every physical. Actually, I'm as I look up at the TV now, I'm watching him pour tea, and it's it's spellbinding. That's I guess it's a fucking movie star. That's all there is.
He really is like truly one of the greatest movie stars. Like we sort of it's kind of unbelievable how like still every second of the film. That he's just completely magnetic. The actor who played the giant enforcer, by the way, is named Sunagoro Rashomon.
No, there you go. Fabulous.
Callback.
What a kick-ass name.
And who plays Ganji? Who plays the old man?
Ganji is played by Ijiro Tono.
He's fucking great.
Really, really amazing. He is in Seven Samurai.
Yes.
And he's also he's in a lot of Jidagechi shows, like a lot of the series that they produced in Japan. He's in Tora.
Oh.
And he is in Tokyo Story, Yasuhiro Ozu's like masterpiece that if folks have not seen is worth seeing. We did a brief episode on No Regrets for Our Youth.
Great movie.
Where we talked a lot about Setsuko Hara, who's in only a couple Kurosawa movies, but definitely worth checking out.
Was it not unlike the American? And I don't know. I'm learning more about the behind the scenes of it all as I'm kind of delving more into this. But was it not unlike the U.S. studio system in that you had a couple of major studios, Toho being
very
one of them,
similar,
and you had your sort of contract players and directors at
those
studios?
Toho, which was sort of the big one from, let's say, like 1940 until, and I'm not an expert on this, but like 1940s till the 60s. There was also Daiei, that was a big one, and Kurosawa made a few films there. The compelling thing about that period, and it's worth reading the Galbraith books for this, is there was huge questions around unionization and who belonged to the unions, and and how they did casting and how actors could be traded similarly to the
No, it's not dissimilar to the
yeah, totally
studio system. Yeah.
And then this film, I believe the film that Kurosawa, basically when he went to make Hidden Fortress, Toho was like, this is too expensive. Like, we can't afford to continue to finance these movies. They weren't doing, I think that they were not doing quite as well as they had been doing. Um, and so Yojimbo is the second of his films second or third, that was financed between Toho and Kurosawa Productions, which was his own company that he built.
Interesting.
And there's actually, this is super inside baseball, but I think you'll appreciate it. For the film The Quiet Duel, which is an interesting movie, he formed a production company with other well-known Japanese directors to put that film together, somewhat similar to the company that Coppola, Friedkin, and I'm banking on directors group. So before Zoetrope, there was directors group that did, and so it's kind of similar.
They've been trying for years. I mean, as far back as Pickford, Fairbanks, and Griffith and Chaplin doing the original United Artists. Trying to do your own thing within the system.
Yeah, and I think that
often didn't work out the way they wanted.
Well, and it worked out for Kurosawa until I think ultimately he stopped working with Mifune. I think that was, and then he makes.
Well, there's a big dry period for a while there.
Yeah,
But when did that start? I guess late 60s?
66.
I mean, Redbeard is like 65, 66, and then that's it. And then there's a big gap between that and is it Kagemusha? Or is there something in between?
Is like 1980. Kagemusha is like late 70s. So that's financed by
George
Lucas
and Coppola. Yeah,
Coppola, right?
That's a really good movie too.
That's 1980.
Yeah,
right.
And then he makes Ron.
Right.
And arguably one of the most, I mean, it's absolutely tremendous movie that we still have an episode we recorded that we have to release. That movie is phenomenal.
Oh, cool.
So,
that's an amazing movie. Yeah, I'm looking forward to rewatching that on another podcast I do called Screen Drafts. We've been going through adaptations of Shakespeare, and the next episode is all about movies inspired by Shakespeare. So we'll get to Throne of Blood and Ron, most likely.
So good.
Bad Sleep Well.
Oof, gotta watch Titus.
Titus we've already talked about. No, we've already.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Because that's actually the play. The next episode is movies that aren't the play themselves, but
it's like impossible to get that. It's not streaming anywhere, right? Titus.
Titus is out of print.
It's like so difficult.
I have the DVD, George. Let's come back. So we were talking a little bit earlier about like movies that recommending a Kurosawa movie to people, and one thing that I thought about was, and it didn't really occur to me until right now, is there's one of my favorite moments in this movie, and this is Kurosawa's second film in wide. It's actually shot in wide. I think a lot of people assume that all of his movies were shot in wide, but it's really Hidden Fortress where he does this. Wow. And there's a scene where the gangster and his wife and his son are debating what to do with Mifune's character.
The composition of that shot.
And
yes.
So the wide angle lens with the close up, and they're all up in each other's shit. And he knows, and I'd love to hear you talk about this. He knows how to use widescreen a wide angle lens in the close and the medium and all the way across the board. And it actually reminds me of when people were weirded out that Tarantino made Hateful Eight and made this like 65 millimeter movie, and most of it is just watching people talk to each other.
Well, because people have this idea that widescreen is only for fucking Lawrence of Arabia,
right?
And look, in the hands of someone who doesn't know what the fuck they're doing, it would be strange to shoot a movie in 70 millimeter in a single room the way Hateful Eight was, but But you're talking to an enormous Hateful Eight fan, so I was fully on board with that. And yes, you're right. Not unlike Hateful Eight, much of this film, there certainly are the big shots in the sort of T-shaped town, street that have scope, for lack of a better word, and are big. But most of the movie is indoors. It's them kind of hide. It's people peeking out and hiding and conspiratorial, like the shot you just mentioned.
It's a hangout movie.
But I can't imagine it. But I can't imagine it without the widescreen. I mean, I can't imagine it without the way he's able to get so much detail and really hone in on what's fascinating about these faces by utilizing the format. And I'm not as your listeners can probably tell, not a cinematographer and don't know much about lenses at all. I can only really talk about just how you feel when you watch it. But it's really incredible and used as I said, and you'll get to this, I guess, maybe in your next episode, used to incredible effect in Sanjuro. And in a very different movie, but he's clearly really figuring out what he can do, with the format, in all these interiors. But as a result, you really, I think, the reason I think it's such an iconic star-making performance is because you're so close in. You're really in his head. It gives you this feeling that you are in the brain as his wheels are turning and he is figuring out how to manipulate these fucking idiots. And then when he is brought low and beaten up, you're in his not only his physical pain, but his sort of survival mode and survival instinct, and his that amazing shot that's, again, another very tight close-up where the light from the lock on the trunk that he's going to use to hide in kind of hits his eye and brightens.
It's an amazing shot.
And illuminates.
Holy shit, yeah.
And that's cinema. I mean, that's cinema.
That's cinema, baby.
That's cinema, folks.
Which was the original title of this podcast, by the way.
That's cinema, folks. That's cinema, baby.
That's cinema, an audio-based format.
That escape sequence too is so damn good.
Oh, it's great. It's great. And that was where he was. And I learned this from the commentary track. I did not know this until I listened to the commentary track. So, but that was very much inspired by that movie I mentioned earlier, The Glass Key.
The Glass Key.
Where I guess, and I actually haven't watched it. Funnily enough, it was just on TCM last week, and I managed to notice it and record it. So I'm going to watch it this week. But I guess there's a sequence in that for 1942 was pretty shockingly violent and somehow made it past the censors. Where he's beaten up and held by goons and has to escape, and it was a big influence on the sequence in Yojimbo. So
the makeup on Mifune in this, when he gets totally keyed up, looks like amazing. Like
it's great.
Look at him, like he looks like he really got the shit beaten out of him.
Yeah. Oh, I'm looking at the shot right now. I'm looking at the shot.
I mean, he gets tossed around too, and that's definitely. It doesn't look like it's fake. It looks like that's like legitimately him being thrown around this room at certain moments.
Well, yeah, the violence is so. It's actually an incredible hat trick because there's no real gore in it. There's
the arm though, like the arm.
There's the arm.
Yeah,
there's
which comes
the
out
hand,
early
the
on.
dog with the hand.
There's the hand with the dog.
What a great visual gag.
Which is amazing. Oh my God, talk about the look he gives.
I know, and the look he gives.
The dog. He's like, the fuck kind of town is this?
It's a great movie of looks. This is a great. It's interesting to that point that like I'm not to get like cranky and old, but my favorite, even though I love artsy, I love artsy shit. I love 8-hour Hungarian movies. I will watch them. But my favorite genre of movies is action movies. Like I just love action movies. I mean, that's like that they're.
You're a human being, Liam.
Is so compelling. Thank you guys. Thank you for being there for me to admit that I, as a white dude, love action movies. Is that
talk about it. Don't hold back.
This podcast got weird about an hour in.
So talk about our emotions about Tony Scott.
Right.
It's like I'm going back and watching these things, and it's like what makes action movies really great is the narrative momentum and the looks and the moments and the fact that like this movie, again, there's not that much action, but everything is built on this incredible sustaining and building of tension and knowing when to pull back and knowing when to unleash it and knowing that it has to build to something, and ultimately that it's like about characters doing, in this case, like something that goes against the nature that we think they have. It's just unbelievable how incredibly we're sitting here being like, this sequence is awesome, but like the thing that we're always going to remember is the looks and the way he turns and how he wanders away at the end of the movie. And it's just, I mean, that's like the biggest thing that I think this movie is influential, is that Kurosawa and Mifune invented a language for being a cynical badass on screen.
Yes,
It's
a cynical
nuts.
badass, but also, again, and this speaks to your point, you know, when the violence occurs, it comes to these kind of explosions.
Right.
You know, like the sequences where he mows through these dudes with his sword are pretty fucking fast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no cutaway. I mean, almost always in a single take, which is amazing.
Really amazing.
And smarter people than I, with more of a knowledge of history, can talk about on some other podcast. But apparently, like the fighting style that he's using and the various moves he's using have a real kind of, are rooted in a kind of historical. I don't know what that is, so I'm not going to try to.
Prince talks about it. Yeah, he talks about.
Yeah, he talks about it in the commentary track
that he uses.
Yeah, it's again like so deliberate. There's no, there's everything is kind of painstakingly. Every decision is very deliberate, and but what I was going to say is, when you were talking about like the looks you remember, the one that genuinely moves me every time I see it, and I think it's a much more moving sequence than its version that exists in A Fistful of Dollars, and that's when he's hiding out at the end of the movie by the river in the shack, and the Cooper comes back and tells him that his boy has been taken, and Mifune's face, the way it turns. It's genuinely moving because you've invested in that relationship, and it's not sentimental, but it belies the notion that this is a movie entirely stocked with amoral assholes that purely are believing in nihilism, because you really feel for, and then when the Cooper's like, it's called, I got you, man. I got a sword for you. That scene happens almost beat for beat in Fistful of Dollars, and with all respect to Fistful of Dollars, a movie that I also love, it doesn't hit in the same way, that scene, for whatever reason. Maybe Eastwood simply at that stage in his career just wasn't the actor Mifune is in this movie. I mean, that's very simple. Could be it. But that really struck me the last time I watched it, was how effective, just as a piece of drama. I think, look, the action movies that work, the ones that endure, even the ones that are completely bonkers, are the ones where the characters make some degree of sense.
100%.
You know? Yeah. You mentioned Tony Scott a second ago. Like, his best movies, it's because the characters, they make sense. Right. It could be in the most outlandish trappings around them. The reason Deja vu. Like the reason the first Die Hard is the best Die Hard is that McClane in that movie makes sense as a human being, reacting to things around him and making choices. It's the simplest fundamentals of drama that are often forgotten. I guess I'm sounding like a cranky old man now, but
you feel that's true 100%.
Or even
you feel
something as crazy as Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The reason that movie works, and it doesn't work, there are plenty of people who would say it doesn't, but for a lot of valid reasons. But my point is, as crazy as a movie like that gets, where there's no remote realism at all, someone like Harrison Ford, like Mifune, anchors it in a kind of, if not realism, reality. If that makes any sense.
They're both also actors who do a really good job of being the guy on camera who gets as close to looking at the lens and being like, "You fucking believe this?" as anyone can.
And Willis does that in Die Hard too.
100%. Like,
what the hell is happening?
Yeah. Right. Like
this is ridiculous.
When you think about and that's why it works. To Temple of Doom, my favorite moment in Temple of Doom is the part when he says, "Prepare to meet Kali in hell."
And
he cuts the thing. It's one of the few moments in Harrison Ford's acting career where he's not just kind of like, what the in the best way. Like, he really goes for the action hero moment there, which isn't necessarily his tendency.
He's been driven to madness by that crazy fucking movie at that point. But
right, totally.
But yeah, I think there's a sort of, and it's a term that's often misused, and I'm sure I've misused it plenty of times in bullshit Hollywood meetings as I'm pitching something. But there's a groundedness to the best star, and even as I'm saying it now, I'm like, oh God, shut up, Bryan. But it's true. You've got to have a kind of anchor in these things Particularly in something like
100%.
this, which, as we've discussed, the performances around him, apart from the old man, are over the top. I mean, they're caricatures. It's the fucking demon Muppet Show.
Which was also the original title of this podcast.
Well, this is great. I've really honed in on what makes you guys tick. Yeah. But it really is. It's the Demon Muppet Show. I mean, that shot that I talked about earlier, where they're walking toward him. I mean, it's lunacy.
Yeah, there's like this tall hulking figure.
It's ridiculous, but it never feels. It's such an incredible balance of tone because it never feels like a spoof, which it easily could.
Right.
It's certainly a commentary to a degree, but it's not a spoof.
Right.
It's not campy.
Yeah.
And much of that has to do with Mifune, but even just in the calibrating of the tone, even that, like the apocalypse scene that you mentioned earlier, where where the one family finally gets the jump on the other family and smokes them out. In that scene, even those grotesque kind of over the top cartoony characters take on a degree of brutality and danger where it's a pretty upsetting scene.
Well, when they kill, kill the woman, especially, and you just like,
and she's horrible, and she's been awful, but even so, you're like, oh shit,
yeah, and just not even giving her a chance, just totally, murk her, and obviously the kid as well. It's a brutal scene,
and that brutality, and it really hits hard because I think up until that, I'm watching it right now. It's funny. Every time I reference something, the scene comes up.
So the commentary track.
Yeah, I know. But when it works because again, it's those explosions of violence, and they're a lot of fun until they're not. And this is still fun, but there's a kind of a pall over it a little bit of horror and so much so that Mifune, he has to come back and write this. Like in a weird way, he's avenging this other family, even though they don't deserve it, because this was just too fucking much.
That's what also the moments of gore do too, where again you feel like there's so many of these comedic elements too. But again, whether it's a severed arm, the spray of blood, the dude at the very end who's like drowning in his own puddle of blood, like those really grotesque moments again hit home in a way because they are so selective. There's so few, but when they're there, again, the stakes are raised, and you're like, okay, there are people that are dying or being slaughtered in front of your eyes.
Well, I think that
so the violence becomes real in a real specific way.
I also think that that's an important component of action movies that can get lost in our contemporary sort of like action movie world where it's of heavily CGI, huge figures destroying cities, like. Not to criticize those movies, but more to point out that like my favorite action movies, I think, are all rooted in like that the fact that violence should be unnatural. So you watch a movie like, Lethal Weapon is a great example of a movie where they show up at that prostitute's house and they talk to the kids across the street, and then they turn to talk to her and the house blows up, and it's like a truly shocking, crazy moment. And that's kind of like where action movies are at their best, when you're like, oh, like what we're seeing is not supposed to be happening. Like it's rooted in a real thing that's happening.
Well, yeah, people. like remember that's remember Speed. Like the reason Speed, to me, the moment I always think about in Speed is with the actor who's sort of I'm friendly with, named Beth Grant, who's a great character actress who you've seen in a bazillion things. But she's the woman in Speed who tries to get off the bus. Do you remember?
Yeah.
She's like, I can't take it anymore. I can't get off the bus.
Yeah.
And it's that scene but see, that's what makes that movie that and other scenes throughout that movie, which is a ridiculous movie by any measure. I mean, you look at it, this is a ridiculous movie, but it again, it's characters who make sense and characters who react to situations in a way that human beings might. And this is crazy that this bus is out of control and this poor woman is brutally killed when she steps out of line. And I think you're right. I think a lot of modern action movies, particularly in a post practical effects world, succumb to lack of just a lack of there's something that's tactile about the
there's no
practical
verisimilitude.
effects.
Well, then again,
Yeah,
going back to that scene where all he does is lay waste to the interior of that house, but it's just like
right.
it's legitimately him. It's legitimately
Mm-hmm.
he's really carrying a sword and he's actually hacking and destroying this set to pieces, and it works because it's real. And it's such a simple
Yeah.
scene, but it works because again the stakes are high. It's really him doing it, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
verisimilitude to it that CGI just doesn't at this moment at least kind of bring with it.
Yeah, totally.
Well, it's also, just to belabor your point, George, it's similar to the arrows in Throne of
Please.
Blood when
Yeah.
they're shooting real
Oh,
arrows at Mifune.
that I mean that might be the greatest. I don't know if there's a
10-second
better
thing
action sequence. I mean,
ever.
I hesitate to even call it an action sequence. It's so much more than that. But it's probably, yeah. I mean, I'll say it and maybe the stabbing scene in Psycho, or there's in terms of violence on film, or the shooting in Bonnie and Clyde, like it's up there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's an incredible. Oh, that scene's amazing. Better than Shakespeare too. It's an improvement on Shakespeare. So much better that he's killed by his own men.
Yeah, that's also a movie that not to go too far off the point, that is almost like this remarkable reduction or minimalist or sort of like riff on incredible source material, right? Like it's just
Oh
so
yeah.
simple and pure and like gets out of its own way and doesn't like overburden the point and moves away from the language in such extraordinary ways. I think that like that's also a really great feature of Kurosawa, and this is really obvious, but like you said, you can just watch these movies and not hear what anyone is saying,
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
and you still have like a totally, I think what makes a movie different from TV, even though I think that that's arguably not true anymore, but like especially in this period, you watch a movie with sound off and it's still like a fully realized experience
Oh
because they're
yeah.
thinking in these like
Yeah.
different terms.
Well, and he's able to to have such a visual command of genre in a way that, as you say, he takes something like Shakespeare and Throne of Blood and filters it through, essentially kabuki theater. I mean the
Mhm.
performances. I mean, we're talking about Throne of Blood. Sorry,
No, no,
it was
It's
bound to
fine.
happen. It's my
It's fine.
favorite,
It's
but
fine. It's
but but
fine.
it actually it speaks to why Mifune is such an incredible actor, because like that's not the same guy. That's not the same human being.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sanjuro in this movie, and his character in Throne of Blood. I mean, that's a very still stylized kind of no theater sort of uh, very 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 in many ways, like again, the faces he's pulling are
Right.
grotesque in a way in Throne of Blood, whereas this is a kind of natural, almost methody sort of living in the environment, as you can feel the ticks on
Hmm.
his back of his neck kind of performance. Completely different.
There's
And
an
Kurosawa is the
absolute
same.
there's an absolutism to the performance in Throne of Blood, if that makes sense. It's all like
Mm,
living in relationship and in serving the tragedy or whatever you want to
yeah.
call it. It's, I don't know if Throne of Blood is quite a tragedy in the way Macbeth is, but he's in service of that story. Yojimbo again is so interesting because he's just kind of a guy who's like there's a certain amount of like meh to his performance in this
I was
movie
like,
in the best way, where he's just
yeah.
like, what the like it's just much more lived in and
I
less
can't wait for you
dependent
guys.
on.
I can't wait for you guys to watch Sanjuro and
I
hear you
can't wait.
guys talk
Yeah,
about
I'm
that,
really excited
because
to
I
see it.
mean, some of his Sanjuro-isms. Because what's fun about Sanjuro is it's aware of the fact that its predecessor was an enormous hit. Like it definitely has
Mm.
that sequel thing where the Yojimbo theme pops in at key moments, which is fun.
Oh, that's really
Um,
interesting.
like it's got in many ways it's a complete repudiation of Yojimbo. Like it's this is not the same movie, and we've put this character in. And indeed, he'd been developing the story, and then he refitted it to have Sanjuro be the lead. it's based on a novel.
So it's like the second half of Don Quixote, where it's like a kind of a reflection on the first half of Don Quixote.
Kind of, or I was going to have a much more crass example where it was it's like Die Hard 2, Die Harder, where they had a novel and they were like, let's put John McClane into it, and so they did, and that's what they did with Sanjuro. But there are all these amazing. I mean, his introduction in the movie, which I won't spoil because I think one of you hasn't seen it yet, but it's just so perfectly him. And it makes one a little sad that maybe there wasn't another one. Although he went on to play a version of the character in a few other. There's a Zatoichi film with him, and he definitely drew on that. There's another one. There's a movie he made. I haven't watched it yet with Charles Bronson, where he's
Red Sun.
That's it. Where he's basically doing Sanjuro, I'm told. So he definitely drew on that.
That's one of our bonus
persona.
Episodes for later in the season. We're going to talk about Red Sun, especially just because such an action specific. Like I've never seen it. I'm really curious to see Charles Bronson and Toshiro Mifune on screen.
I suppose I imagine you've heard this since you guys have been researching him, but I only heard for the first time. I don't know how this ever escaped me that he was the original choice for Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah,
in Star Wars.
I did not know that. I thought it was Dustin Hoffman. Isn't that how that rumor started?
George, give me Please, a line reading of Dustin Hoffman as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Go.
Oh my god, I can't do Dustin Hoffman. You know I can't do Dustin Hoffman. You should have said James Gandolfini. Or Al Pacino.
James Gandolfini's
the only two impersonations that I could do on our podcast.
Well, now I've got to hear at least Pacino.
Do Pacino. Give me.
Oh my god. Pacino. Dude, you're putting me in the spot here.
Give me. Let's see. What's the best line? What's the?
You got to do something about the Death Star having a big ass.
Death Star has
a great ass.
Okay,
she had a great ass.
I don't want to be rude, but Obi-Wan Kenobi never talked about the.
Yeah,
Death
for a
Star's
second I was like, "What?" And then I
we're both confused.
Got the reference.
I was kind of hoping we were gonna get like, that's a name I've not heard in a long time.
A long time. A long time. Give me all you got.
I think we could do this for hours, so I'm going to cut it off before it goes on for too long. Bryan, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thanks,
it's been
my pleasure.
Blast.
This was a delight, gentlemen.
We can't wait for
the
series to come out.
Oh, me too. I mean, look, and this is very, very early in the development stage. I mean, I'm literally just working on my initial notes for the producers, and there are many steps before it's ever a TV show, and hopefully a year or two from now, when people are listening to back episodes, it actually became a TV show, because there's been plenty of things I've worked on that didn't. But it's been an amazing, if nothing else, it's been an amazing excuse to watch this incredible movie over and over again. So and to come talk to it with you, gentlemen.
We loved having you. Tell us a little bit more about. I mean, you've got a few things going on, but we'd love to hear a little more about Screen Drafts. So we'd love to plug.
Oh yeah, well you guys
suggest an episode.
So you guys should come on. I'll talk to Clay and Ryan and have you guys come on. You guys would do amazing on that. No, it's not my podcast. It's just one that I've recurred on a lot this past year and a half, and it's just a terrific movie podcast wherein guests competitively collaborate, as Clay termed it, to draft the definitive top seven list of any given topic. And sometimes that is expanded to 11 or 13 in various other versions. And occasionally you'll do something called a super draft, where you'll tackle the entire filmography of somebody, but most of the time it's 7, which proves to be a lot harder than a top 10. In a lot of great ways. And basically,
I can see that.
If you two were to go on, let's say you two were to go on and draft the films of Toshiro Mifune, you would each, independent of each other, make your top 7 list of Mifune films. You would then meet Clay and Ryan, the hosts, would give you a trivia question. And then, Liam, let's say you got that right. You would then get to pick your position. You would then get to pick your position. You could have,
because it's a draft.
Exactly. But each of you gets a veto, so you can use your veto to move up a title you think is too low or eliminate a title entirely. So it's sort of a fun game that inspires great film discussion. It's been basically my lifesaver hobby in this past year during the pandemic. And I've gone on and talked about everything from Disney 2D animated films to Philip Seymour Hoffman to the films of Max von Sydow to Shakespeare films to 1960s musical to 1930s Warner Brothers pictures. So any time you want to tune in, you'll find a topic that interests you.
What was your top 7 Phil Hoffmans? Do you remember?
I will say, folks, if you want to listen to the episode, turn it off now so you can listen. Because I don't. But
No spoilers,
my top. Well, again, I did this in collaboration with my dear friend and colleague Milla Bell Hart, who was a writer on a show that a writer's room that I ran last year, and is a dear friend. So we ended up settling on Magnolia, number 1.
Okay.
So it was Magnolia. Yeah, Magnolia.
Wow.
Which weirdly was both of our number 1s. Actually, that was one of those
great movie.
Yeah, it was Magnolia. I'm trying to remember. It was Magnolia, The Master, Boogie Nights. So a rare Screen Drafts, one director dominating the top 3.
Interesting.
So it was Magnolia, Master, Boogie Nights. Gosh, now I'm forgetting. I want to say Doubt, maybe.
Okay, he's great in that.
Capote, Almost Famous, and Talented Mr. Ripley.
Oh, yeah.
So when we
that
did
was the 7.
When we did our Phil Hoffman season, we did a draft beforehand because we didn't. We
did you?
Going to do 50 movies, but we were like, let's pick like 16 or something like that. And a rule we made was only one film by each director, so we could only pick one Paul Thomas Anderson movie. And George won the coin flip, and he picked The Master. And
hard to argue.
I was not a Master fan. I'd seen it twice. I fell asleep both times, and I was like, I don't know. And then we watched it, and I was like, holy shit, this movie is a masterpiece. No, what's wrong with me?
It's definitely one that takes a few viewings, and even if you don't care for it, his performance in it is so good. Is unassailable. But 7, that's what's fun about the show is 7's too little because we didn't get, like, for instance, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead on there, which is an astonishing performance. So, but anyway, you guys, I'll talk to the guys and have you guys on. Yeah. You guys would be great on it. It'd be so much. We would love it's a lot of fun.
To come on that. Totally. Yeah. So next up on the show for us, we have Sanjuro coming up in a couple weeks, and then High and Low with special guest Bill Gay-Abiri to talk about that movie, which I think is just going to be ridiculous because he's a great writer and thinker and talker. So that's going to be really fun. And then we're going to wrap it up with Redbeard.
That'll be so you're just doing Mifune, and you got a couple of bonuses, you said?
So we did we recorded an episode with actually our mutual friend Mark Pagan on The Wedding Ring, which is a romance that Pagan that movie
Pagan started. Yeah.
Pagan's in it.
Wow,
he's very good.
That's cool.
Yeah, he's
I'll
really
have to watch
good.
it. I've never seen it.
It's pretty good. It's on the Criterion channel.
Okay, great.
It's a bit melodramatic.
We have a bonus of Ron, and we're gonna do Dreams. I think we're gonna wrap up things with Dreams.
That's a good idea.
That's sort of like a
fitting.
Yeah, for sure. So
yeah,
but Bryan, this has been really, really great.
Again,
We'd love to have you back on in the future to talk about.
Would love to anytime. I've been
awesome.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Please join us for the outro of the show. Oh, everybody, please rate, review, subscribe, and we have a Patreon. So please give us $3 a month for George and I to argue about Tenet.
Just specifically, the Patreon gets you.
It's just,
you guys are arguing about Tenet
every week for 3 hours. We record a 3-hour episode. We just argue about Tenet.
The way that it works is we do it forward, and then we immediately reverse the audio and play it backwards. And people are really.
It's avant-garde podcasting. We feel like it's really cutting edge.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it.
It was produced. Christopher Nolan produced it. I was Liam Billingham.
I was George Fragopoulos.
I was Bryan Cogman, and still am.
And this was.
Or am I?
I think you
Sorry.
are. This was.
Riverbusters. Yes, I did it.
Oh, you beat me to it that time.
Fuck yeah.